You think automation is going to impact your job? 84% of the people answering this survey said no. In the US a year ago, Pew Research asked a similar question about technology and the impact on jobs. They interviewed Americans from across the country, and 80% of the respondents felt that automation and technological change wouldn't impact their job in any meaningful way for the next 50 years. You heard me, 50 years. Yet out of this same poll, 2/3 of the same people thought that it would impact other jobs. So basically, it would have an impact, just not on my job. The reality is actually a lot different. A few weeks ago, there was a study released by the World Economic Forum. And what they forecast was that by 2020, that's only a few years away, that across 15 developed nations, 5 million jobs would be lost due to automation. That's not a long way away. Here in Australia, CETA did a study a couple of years ago where they did some really detailed modeling of all kinds of jobs across the country. And what they found was that in a 10 to 15 year period, that anywhere up to 40% of today's jobs will be gone because of automation or potentially changed massively. McKinsey did a study a little while ago where they looked across the full spectrum of jobs, and 45% of the things that people do within a given job can be automated. That's not to say that the job will completely go away, but there are substantial components of a person's job today that can be automated. So why do we have this disconnect? Well, I've got a little theory. If I think back to 1967, the world was a lot different. Computers were huge mainframes that took up entire rooms, and only the very biggest companies had them. The only people in companies who typed were in a typing pool. Texas Instruments invented the first pocket calculator in 1967. Auntie Norma said that here in Australia, Aboriginals were given the right to vote in 1967. In the United States, it was declared constitutional for the first time to have interracial marriages. A lot has changed in 50 years, but it's happened slowly. So if I look at 1967, we see this technological change, and it's going upwards, but it's from a really small base. So it's been doubling every 18 to 24 months for a really long time, but from a small base. Then we get to the 2000s, we start to get to a curve, technology starts to accelerate faster. We're now at a cusp right here today where changes, an 18 to 24 month period of doubling start to become exponential and go like this. And that means that there is going to be an absolutely massive impact on society. So today I'd like to talk about a couple of the technologies that are going to impact the public sector as well as some of the jobs of the future, because I don't want to give you a doom and gloom message. There are things that are going to change much more rapidly than you expect, but there will be an upside to it if we plan properly. So one of the things in the public space that you're probably familiar with is smart cities. How many of you have heard the term? Anybody? Most of you. So we're talking about basically attaching sensors to all sorts of things, to managing energy better, to having cameras all over the place, to be able to get real-time insights into the things that are happening in our built environment. One of the projects that I like right here in Sydney is called Mousetrap, and it's a sensor that's being deployed on Sydney trains that's able to sniff out the odor of spray paint and graffiti and literally start a CCTV camera feed back to trains office and police and let people see what's happening with graffiti in real time. In Monica, in Canberra, they're doing a smart parking trial where, you know, those red and green lights that are in parking garages that direct you to where there's an empty space? Well, they're doing it across a suburb, and not just in parking garages, but also on the streets. And they have LED signs that will direct you to where there are free spaces. And they have an app that lets you top up the parking meter rather than having to run back to put more coins in the meter. As you start going forward in time, what we're going to see are things like bus schedules that are not rigid, that actually change based on where people are waiting. You'll see real-time changes to train schedules and routes because they're taking real-time information in. Augmented reality is another amazing technology. So when I talk about AR, I'm talking about having a digital overlay on top of what you see. So it looks like it's about out here in your field of vision, if you haven't played with it, where you've got digital information superimposed on the real world. So today you might play around with something like Microsoft HoloLens or Meta 2, but already coming out later this year are glasses that look like regular reading glasses, where you wouldn't even know somebody's wearing an augmented reality headset. And they have cameras in them. There are some really cool applications for the public sector. The smart helmet that I'm showing in the bottom right here is from a company in California called Daiquiri. It combines a hard hat for construction workers with augmented reality so that as somebody is out in the field and they're looking at this massive array of pipes, they can see what's in the pipes. They can see what the pressure is, how hot it is, or how cold it is. Because they've got cameras in these glasses that can coordinate in real time with colleagues in the back office. They can see superimposed on their vision knobs that tell them which way to turn a dial. Another really cool app that I saw at the Consumer Electronics Show in January, it's this massive trade show in Las Vegas, was this AR insert for firefighter masks. So in the world of firefighting, they've had digital imaging for quite a number of years, but it's handheld. What this does, and it's really cool because it fits into existing masks, is that it allows firefighters to see infrared in real time directly from their headpiece and lets them have both hands for free. Virtual reality is a little bit different to augmented reality in that the real world is blocked out. We're going to start seeing a lot of VR in planning for the public sector. This particular picture is looking at VR for retail stores, where instead of actually designing stores and doing a mock-up, you do the mock-up in digital form and you walk through and you look at product placement and you look at display stands and you look at usability. The same technology is going to be used in looking at the public space for property development and many other things. Biometrics is another application that we will see absolutely everywhere, and in particular facial recognition. So with facial recognition, in many cases, you're looking at matching a picture that someone has taken, maybe a passport or a driver's license, with someone that's being cooperative and staring right at a camera. But already there are algorithms that are designed that let you pick out faces in a crowd while people are moving and from an angle. There's a company up in Queensland called Imagis Technologies that has designed software that does just that. But when you combine facial recognition with artificial intelligence, you also then have the ability to start picking out the emotions of people that you're capturing. And there are a lot of applications. Imagine that you're at a business meeting and you're wearing a pair of glasses that look like a reading glass, but it's really augmented reality, and you're picking up on the emotions of the person that you're negotiating with, and you're getting real-time digital information. Can you imagine how that would be a game changer? In a public sector environment, though, let's take another application. This hasn't been designed, but it's one of my ideas. And that is, let's say you've got a secure facility, maybe an electrical substation or something else that's secure. You've got a database of people who work there with their pictures as well as contractors. You can do an elimination of people walking around this area to see if they're in that database. If the answer is no, you start looking at the emotion on someone's face, and if somebody's starting to look worried or nervous and they're pacing around an area multiple times, you may be able to take predictive action that could prevent a cyber attack or something really, really nasty. There are endless possibilities here. But the world of the future is going to go a lot further than that. Scenes like this one might be a thing of the distant past in the not too distant future. This picture was taken in Bangalore, India, about 2 years ago. There was a burst water main on a major road, and after months of complaining, the council workers did nothing to fix it up. It was actually 12 feet wide. Can you imagine this on a major road? A local artist decided to spend about $99 US, big bucks for him, to design a mock crocodile, stick it in the pothole, paint it like a moat, and then it went viral. Everybody circulating this all around, and lo and behold, the pothole was fixed the next day. In the UK, there's a project that's a collaboration between the national government, Leeds University, and Leeds City Council, and some other partners that are looking to design fleets of tiny little robots to do self-repair of the city. I was talking to one of the lead scientists there a little while ago about this project, and it is absolutely fascinating. They haven't invented all the robots yet. They're about a year into the project. But there's 3 basic modes that they're looking to do. One of them is to have robots that will be able to perch onto structures, have manipulator arms, and be able to do things like change light bulbs. Another thing that they're planning to do is to be proactive with things like potholes and street repairs and catch these things before they become problems. So when I was thinking about this, initially I thought, oh, maybe they'll have drones fly around and map out the streets. And asking, is that what you're going to do? The answer was no, actually. We're thinking of collaborating with industry and with driverless cars, because the driverless cars have all kinds of sensors. Why don't we use data from the cars to figure out where there are problems with the road, and then send out the little tiny robots, which may end up having 3D printers attached to them. And there's yet another, even more ambitious mode, and that is actually having little tiny robots that will live deep underneath the city inside of pipes. And these little robots may indeed be swarm bots, bunches of little tiny robots that can assemble and disassemble in different shapes and literally go where no human can. Almost like the Transformers that we see in the movies. And in fact, if you talk to the scientists involved in this project, the way they see this robot infrastructure working is making the city like a living organism, and the robots are the white blood cells that go after the defects in the city in real time before they get out of hand. Already, right here in Sydney, on the Harbour Bridge, we have 2 robots, Sandy and Rosie, that are helping out with grit blasting. It came about as a collaboration between New South Wales Roads and Maritime and UTS. And the problem was, how do we, first of all, protect workers in what can be a hazardous occupation? And secondly, how do we get into these tiny crawl spaces that humans can't get into because rust can destroy steel, and we want the bridge to maintain its integrity? So the researchers turned to biology and designed a robot that was modeled after an inchworm. It's called Croc, and it's 100% autonomous. In other words, it's not being controlled by any human. It's able to map out a completely unstructured environment, and it reports it back in real time, gets stored in a geospatial information system, and the bridge workers are then able to determine what kind of maintenance may be required. Pretty amazing that it's already live, and it's been part of a 7-year collaboration. Many of you would have heard about 3D printing, and there's lots and lots that can be said there, but there's a technology that goes beyond this. It's called 4D printing. It's actually a terrible name for a really cool technology, because what they're doing is taking 3D printing, but using materials that have known geometries that are able to change shape and structure when they are involved in encountering external stimuli, whether it be heat or water or pressure. So you can imagine that sitting deep in the city, you've got water mains that are able to change shape as they have different pressure against them. There is so much that can be done with this really new emerging technology. So let's talk about robots and jobs for a moment, because there's a little bit of a fear factor that goes on here. So some of the decision criteria for robots and jobs. Well, number one, if you're looking at automation of a job, is it something that can be automated with today's technology or technology in the near future? Second, how much is it going to cost? Is it actually worth implementing? The third and fourth things are interlocked, and that has to do with the scarcity of labor and the cost of labor. If you have something that needs to be done and there are only very few people in the world able to do it, or not in your geography, then it might make sense to automate it. But if you've got lots of cheap and abundant labor and it's expensive to automate, maybe that's not the top of your list. But there are other things too. It's not just about the cost equation of labor versus technology. One of the things you have to look at is what are the additional things that automation will bring to the table, either in terms of productivity or in terms of additional insights. So if I think about the world of agriculture and I think about robots there, and there are a lot being designed, a robot could go along a row of any kind of plant and not only pick different harvested fruits, but count buds of flowers and be able to do forecasts of what a yield might be. Sensors can be on that robot that look at fungus or moisture levels or almost anything else that can be measured. There's also the regulatory side of things. So for instance, if a country or a state were to say driverless cars are illegal here, then you wouldn't see that kind of automation. And then the last is social acceptance. And here I'll turn to the world of science fiction, and in particular Isaac Asimov, who I read as a little girl and probably one of the world's most prolific writers of robots. And in his stories, there was one that took place on Earth 1,000 years from now, where people and robots were commingling together, but so many people had been displaced from robots that people routinely bashed them. You know, there was a real conflict. To worlds in outer space that he imagined where the robots far outnumbered humans and were really useful and were humanoid in nature, to the point where in one story a woman married a robot. So 50 years from now, maybe there'll be a constitutional amendment that allows people to marry robots. in America. But in general, when I'm looking at this whole process of automation, whether it's with robots or artificial intelligence, there are really three things that I think would be at risk. One is anything that's manual labor that can be automated very, very easily with today's tech. And then the other that really impacts white-collar jobs would be things that involve data collection and data processing. So in the world of driverless cars, you've probably heard a lot about them, but this is one that you may not have heard of. It's called the Mercedes Vision Van, and I saw this at the Consumer Electronics Show. So not only can it be driven in autonomous mode, it has a robot cargo loader out in the back, and it's got drones on the top. And what the drones can do is take packages from, there's a hole, from the cargo loader and deliver them while the person driving the van is delivering perhaps a more fragile package. They're looking at another version of this where they'll have bots that are on the ground, similar to what Damon was talking about, and the little bots will go off in different directions delivering things. You can imagine a day where something like this might not have the human driver at all. Autonomous trucks have been legal to drive in the state of Nevada on highways for 2 years already, in 2015. And this is a picture of one of those trucks, and they still require a human to be in the truck, but the human is actually not driving. They're doing email, watching videos, doing all sorts of things. At some point, somebody's going to say, well, why do we still need this human sitting in the truck when the truck is capable of driving itself? About 2 weeks ago, Volvo came out with a trash truck that is automated. And this truck actually works where the driver is not driving the vehicle, he is in back of the truck goes in reverse, and the driver just empties the refuse cans into the back of the truck. They're working on another version of this in conjunction with 3 universities and Renova, which is a waste collection refuse company, and they're putting sensors in the trash cans, and they've designed, prototyped at least, little robots that are able to, from drones that are on top of the trash truck, know where the trash cans are, pick up those trash cans, and put them into the waste area, and when they're finished, hitching a ride right on back of the truck. Trash collectors may go the way of gaslight street lighters in the 1800s. Bye-bye. Vehicle-to-vehicle communication is going to be so important, and this is something that really impacts the public sector. And there are many different things that I could say about this, but I'll keep it brief because there's some other cool stuff I want to share with you. First, with all the sensors on vehicles, they will be communicating not just with the driver or passengers in the car, but with each other and up into the cloud with navigation systems. They'll be communicating with infrastructure like traffic lights and like speed limit signs and all sorts of other things. And there will be a network that needs to be designed for autonomous vehicles. In the public sector, there's going to be a lot of retrofitting of putting on sensors on top of public infrastructure to be able to communicate with these driverless vehicles. Another really interesting, how shall I say, technology, an idea, is from Elon Musk, and that's Hyperloop. They're already testing this in the Nevada desert. So what they're doing is taking these really big tubes, and it's at a near vacuum, and they're using magnetic levitation to hurl pods, which may contain people or contain cargo, through this system at an average speed of about 760 kilometers an hour and a top speed of 1,200 kilometers an hour. So far, the testing looks like it's working out really well. And if it does, there's already an order waiting to be filled in the UAE to get between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, which is an hour and a half drive, and it will only take 12 minutes. Imagine having Hyperloop along the East Coast, winding through regional centers and making it super quick to get between places. Like, let's say it took 12 minutes to get from here to Canberra. How would that change things on the communities in the path? There is a real opportunity to use some of these technologies to actually implement this idea of 30-minute cities. The robots are coming. This is from CES, and I'll point out just two things in these pictures. I took all of them. On the right side, there are two robots that are basically digital assistants that are in cute little robotic form, and they have voice recognition built into them. A lot of what I was seeing at CES had technologies like Amazon Alexa built into them. The second thing I would point out to you is the picture that's on the very top in the middle, the Lubot. This little robot is designed for kids from the age of 2 upwards. It's connected to the cloud and it talks to kids in natural language. Today's children are going to grow up with robots. There are already robots being used well outside of factory floors and going well beyond the whole driverless car space. So starting with the top left, this is a robot called SAM, Semi-Autonomous Mason. So there are still humans that work with it, but it's a bricklaying robot. So a human mason can lay between 300 and 400 bricks a day. Sam can do 1,200 bricks a day. There's an Australian version called Hadrian that works a little bit differently. It's completely autonomous, and it's said to be even faster than Sam. The robot next to it is from Locus Robotics, and it's in a warehouse, and it's doing a lot of the picking and moving around inside a warehouse. Amazon already has 47,000 robots in their warehouse. It is absolutely amazing. Going below that is a restaurant in China. You're greeted by a robot concierge when you walk in. You're served your dinner by one of these little robots here, and back in the kitchen, there are other robots that are cooking dumplings and doing stir frying. And the last picture down on the bottom is from San Jose, and it's an Orchard hardware store, and the robot is called Oshbot. It's a concierge. You walk in, and let's say you're a woman like me and you're not really used to hardware stores, and you've got some kind of widget that you need. You wave it in front of the robot, it scans it, it then comes up with pictures on the screen. You pick which one is closest to the thing you're looking for, and it wheels you to the exact spot where that widget happens to be. And on its back, by the way, it's got digital advertising. And if they implement facial recognition or demographic recognition, it could actually change the signs to be relevant to whoever's standing in back of the robot. It's going to go even further. In Yale University, along with some collaborators, they've designed a robot hand that is modeled after a human. So they 3D scanned a human skeleton, and then they built a robot that was based just like it. And their idea is that they'd like to be able to grow skin and tendons on top of this robot hand. This hand already is so articulated that it can grasp rolls of tape. It can pick up a CD. It's very different than the robots of today. But you can imagine where this is leading to. When this starts to come to fruition, and by the way, the skin and tendons would probably be 3D printed with a bioprinter, we would be looking at androids, the sorts of things that you see in science fiction. Imagine if you had robots that looked a whole lot like humans in your midst. We're going to see drones everywhere, lots of shapes and sizes. we're already seeing them today, and they're armed with video cameras. There are insurance companies like IAG that are using them to help assess damage when there's a storm or a flood or a bushfire. We're seeing them for asset inspection in the telecommunications market and in the utility space. There's one really cool one that came out of the Netherlands, which is this bottom middle yellow one, that is actually an ambulance drone. It has a defibrillator in it. So it's basically a flying defibrillator. If somebody has a heart attack, unfortunately, ambulances aren't able to get to them fast enough because you need really, really quick action. This drone can fly at 100 kilometers an hour, and it's got an audio-visual connection with the person who's making the call. So it's homing in on their GPS. And a trained medical person can talk a lay person through putting on a defibrillator and saving lives. Another really cool one that I saw at CES that is totally out of science fiction is on the bottom right, and it's a flying taxi. It's a real live working prototype from a company in China. It's called the EHang 184. And I think the biggest hurdle for that one is a regulatory hurdle rather than a technological hurdle. It can take one passenger. It can carry max of 220 pounds, so you can't be too heavy and want to be riding this. It'll go over 100 kilometers, and it has about a 23-minute flying range. You get into this, and all you do is, on your app, you select where you want to go. We will have highways in the sky. There's already work being done in America by NASA and in conjunction with Amazon and other industry players to start to look at segmenting airspace by height and by corridors for different types of drones, those that are fully autonomous as opposed to those that are manually controlled. I'm not sure who in Australia will be controlling this. It probably will be CASA, but what's interesting in the US is that it's not the FAA, it's actually NASA that's actually taking the lead here. And there'll be so many new jobs that come out of this. There'll be people who do packaging that is designed for aerodynamic drone delivery. There'll be people who are in certification and education for pilots' licenses and all sorts of things. It's an amazing new area. When I talk about robotics, you can't really go past artificial intelligence because that's what drives all these robots, but it's software that's inside of the robot. And AI is quite capable of being used without a physical instantiation. In other words, just software. In the old days, when AI was first coming into fruition, back in the 1950s, the way that they were looking at to design these systems was to mimic experts. So they would program in, hard code if you like, the decision trees that experts would use to make a decision that was complex. It's all different today. Today, it's all about cognitive learning and deep learning and machine intelligence. And the way that you teach an AI is you throw it tons of data. You throw it databases, you throw it Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, YouTube videos, social media feeds. Almost anything that you can think of is used as training material for these AIs. We're already starting to see AI in the workforce. One of the first areas that many people will encounter in AI is in the area of finance. Have any of you heard of robo-advisors? Anybody? Yeah, a few. So basically the idea is that an AI, which can sift through massive amounts of data, is going to be able to make faster financial decisions for you and more accurate decisions because it's able to crunch through so much data. Companies in this area are projecting that human financial advisors could achieve an ROI of something like this over a 10-year period, whereas with a robo-advisor you can see the investment go like that. Still has to be proven out. In the field of medicine, IBM Watson, in conjunction with Sloan Kettering Hospital, is doing oncology with AI. And what the AI is doing there is sifting through mountains of conference proceedings, clinical lab trials, and all kinds of new pharmaceutical reports, matching it with very complex patient histories and providing, if you like, a summary to a trained oncologist who then is able to just take this distilled information and apply it to a particular patient. In the UK, there's a bankruptcy law firm that has an AI called Ross. And what Ross does is it pours through the thousands of documents that are involved in bankruptcy cases and comes to the nit of the problem, and then the lawyers take over from there. In the world of the public sector, I think that there's also a great opportunity to use AI to reduce paperwork. One of the studies that I was reading just recently said that in Colorado, child care workers spent about 37% of their time just doing paperwork and only about 9% of their time visiting with kids or parents. Imagine if you had the AI doing the paperwork side and the child care caseworkers actually spending more time with families. Chatbots are another area that government can take great advantage of. So a chatbot might respond by text on a mobile phone or by a website. In North Carolina, they did a study just a little while ago, and it turns out that 80% of the queries they get that take up a lot of time are for password resets. Imagine if you had a chatbot that can automate something like that. Just the tip of the iceberg. There is image detection that is incredible with artificial intelligence, and this is an initiative from PSMA, a Commonwealth government department. It's a world-first initiative, and they're looking to map and analyze continent-wide the built infrastructure across Australia. So imagine having a data set that you can query that will tell you where every pool is, that will give you heights of vegetation, that will be able to tell you all kinds of information about buildings. They're already partnering with a commercial company, Pitney Bowes, and they're mapping it with things like census data and other things to let businesses query things that matter to their business against the built environment. It's a really cool project. So, what are some of the jobs of the future? And I'll quickly go through a couple that I think we'll be seeing in the very, very near term. One that's not here today will be the chief of human and robot orchestration. And when I use the term robot, I'm talking about software robots as well. It will be about finding the best ways to use automation in the workspace. Another job will be a robot teacher. And I'm not talking about either of these two becoming the teachers. You wouldn't want the one on the right, this autonomous lethal mech robot, teaching your kids. Can you imagine, hey kid, wrong answer, ka-choong? No. I'm talking about humans that will train the robots how to be more human and actually train them in new skill sets. And there are a world of opportunities there, not just for people that are roboticists, but there'll also be jobs that involve maintaining the robots, reprogramming them to do different things, and starting to talk to them in natural language and instructing the robot rather than the robot instructing you. I believe we will also see empathy trainers, and this is going to the heart of what does it mean to be human, those soft skills, the things that we feel, our creativity. And indeed, in some of the biggest AI companies, like in IBM Watson, they're hiring people like poets and philosophers to help train their AIs become more human-like in the way that they react to people. I believe we will also see a role called Chief Digital Ethics Officer. And this is, again, another role. When it comes to deciding who might be made redundant, quote unquote, in automation, that's going to be a really important life-changing decision. But it goes a lot further behind it. There are some weird things that happen with AI because you have a whole bunch of inputs, then you've got various neural network layers sitting in here, and then you get an output. And it's not always clear from the inputs how you get to a decision. There's one case in the US where they were looking at software that is deciding parole opportunities for people who are in jail. And they look at 137 different factors. But what they found was that the software was going easier on Caucasian defendants and harder on defendants who were not Caucasian. But of the 137 factors fed in, race was not one of them. I suspect that it's probably some of the language that was used in different documents that were fed into the AI that might have been the thing that tipped it over to where black defendants were getting harsher sentences than white defendants, even though if you analyze it case by case, it doesn't really make sense. And the role of a chief digital ethics officer would be looking at those kinds of inputs and outputs and how that actually impacts an organization. I think we're going to see privacy guardians too, and especially in the public sector, because there's so much that is being collected about us that people will want to have the ability to know, what do you know about me? What do I give you permission to do? And how do I get my personal life back? And who are you selling that information to? And do I give you permission to share it with third parties? So going into the future, I also think that we're going to see technology going deeper and deeper into our bodies. And one of the very first spaces it's going to happen is with smart contacts. And I talked about augmented reality. Imagine having that as a contact lens in your eyes, where suddenly you've got an overview of all kinds of digital information that you can then have access to. And it's got biotech capabilities that allow you to do things like autofocus. So I need reading glasses and I'm constantly popping them on and off. I would love to have lenses that I don't need to do that, and maybe give me telephoto vision and infrared vision. And by the way, your tear ducts, you can tell a lot from that. If you have diabetes, you can pick up your insulin levels just from your tear ducts. And there are even pharmaceutical companies that are looking to do drug delivery via contact lenses. And that's just the beginning. Then we go into brain implants. And that is a huge, huge subject. There's a ton of work happening in the med tech world. And in the not too distant future, we may very well have interfaces that are brain-machine interfaces that allow us to interact with the built environment and with robots. So the thing I'd like to leave you thinking about is something really, really pragmatic, and that is, with your role, the things that you do today, what parts of your job can be automated? If you're looking at it from a company perspective, look at it holistically and start to understand, for all the different job functions, what are the things that can or should be automated. But we've got to think about people, because the last thing we can afford as a society is to have something like 40 to 50% of today's people unemployed. That would be an absolute disaster any way you look at it. So the other thing I would really strongly recommend is that we start looking at skills assessments for people across the board to find out what they're good at and where they might like to go next, and then invest in retraining so that before the automation hits, people have developed new skill sets that they're able to bring into their job life. This is a big project, but it's one that I think is very, very important for our global society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
People often ask me about innovation and whether it should be top-down driven like Steve Jobs, or it should come from frontline staff. And the answer is, I think
both are required. I think you need to have a culture of innovation, but certainly if you don't have a leadership team and a board that is willing to invest in innovation and try different things, it's really difficult to be successful. But you can't dictate innovation. You have to involve your staff and your people in the process and get great ideas from people. And I think part of it starts with learning about what's possible, where our technology is at now, things that seem like science fiction but today are already science fact. If people in your front line don't know that that exists, then you're limited in the kind of innovation that they might dream up. So it's a combination of education and learning and a blend of from the top and from the bottom. And of course the middle too. There's also been a question about blockchain and its potential to really change much of business as usual, and in particular in the payments market. Well, there are countries around the world that are already looking at digital currencies from a countrywide perspective. But if you limit your understanding of blockchain to just finance, you're really cutting off a lot of other capabilities of blockchain. For example, it can be used in the securities world to be able to conduct transactions in a much faster amount of time. ASX is already looking at blockchain. It can be used in areas like real estate where you want to have secure knowledge of the provenance of land titles. It's being investigated for things like diamond trading and artwork and much, much, much more. I think if any one government tries to stop it, they'll find that they're behind a global tidal wave.